Before Aragorn and Arwen, before the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, the entire destiny of men was shaped by the first mortal to ever look an elf in the eye and choose friendship over fear. His personal choice to serve an elven king was an act of faith so profound it established a bond that would echo for thousands of years, a legacy that makes the last alliance seem not a political treaty, but the fulfillment of an ancient promise. This is the chronicle of the coming of men into the world of the firstborn, the story of Bëor the Old, and the fateful first meeting that would forever bind the fates of the two children of Ilúvatar. They awoke to a world already ancient. For countless ages, the elves had walked beneath the light of the stars, and the Valar had shaped the continents in a war against a primordial dark. But the second-born, the Atani, the race of men, opened their eyes not to the gentle silver of starlight, but to the blinding gold of the new risen sun. This was their first memory, a light so fierce it hurt their eyes, and a heat that promised both life and death. They were born in a land far to the east of all the tales later told, a place named Hildorian. There, in the shadow of the Orocarni, the mountains of the east, they were children in a world of giants. They had no memory of the music of the Ainur, no knowledge of the Valar, and no inkling of the great enemy who had already marred the world they were to inherit. But they felt his presence. A shadow lay upon their hearts, a whisper of mortality, and a fear of the dark that drove them ever westward, as if pulled by an instinct they could not name. They sought a light they had never known, fleeing a darkness they could not comprehend. They were the followers, a people defined by their journey, their brief and flickering lives, a stark contrast to the eternal stillness of the elves. Their journey was one of generations. They were not a single people, but a collection of tribes and houses, each with their own chieftain and traditions. Over long and weary years, they passed out of the east and journeyed into the unknown lands of Middle-earth. Their numbers were winnowed by famine, by beast, and by the cruel turns of the wild. They learned the crafts of survival, the forging of simple weapons, the taming of animals, and the art of living in a world that was not made for them. They were sturdy, resilient, and quick to learn. But they were also quick to fear, quick to despair, and their lives burned out like candles in a gale. Each new generation was born into the journey, their only inheritance. The stories of the generation before them, tales of a lost home and a relentless drive toward the setting sun. But how does a people, born into darkness and fear, learn to trust the light? How does a mortal, whose every breath is a countdown to his end, stand before an immortal and see a friend instead of a god or a demon? The answer lies not with a king or a conqueror, but with a single man. His name was Balan, though history would remember him by another. He was the chieftain of the first and greatest of the houses of men to complete the journey. For over 300 years of the sun his people had marched, generation after generation, until at last they saw before them a sight no mortal had ever witnessed. They saw the Ered Luin, the Blue Mountains. They were a barrier of stone and ice, a final testament to the hardship of their road. With strength born of desperation, they found a pass and descended into a new world. They had crossed into Beleriand. The land was different here. The air was cleaner, the water sweeter, and the silence of the forests was deeper than any they had ever known. It was a land under a different law, a land that remembered the light of the two trees and the music of the Valar. It was the land of the elves. Though the men did not know it, they had walked from the dawn of their own history into the middle of another's. It was Finrod Felagund, son of Finarfin, king of Nargothrond, and friend of all, who found them. He had journeyed far to the east of his own lands, hunting with the sons of Feanor, but had grown weary of their company and wandered alone, drawn by the strange newness of the land. He was the first of the Noldor to lay eyes upon the second-born children of Ilúvatar. He saw them in a vale among the woodlands, a people strange and rough-hewn. He watched them in their sleep, and a great wonder filled him. They were like his own kind, and yet utterly different. Their faces were weathered by the sun and marked by care. Their sleep was heavy and dreamless, a temporary escape from a life of toil. They were not the graceful, timeless Eldar, but something new, something fragile. He felt a love for them stir in his heart. He understood in that moment that they were kin, the long-sundered brothers of his race, spoken of in the prophecies of the Valar. And so, he did not wake them. He waited until they slept, and then crept among them, silent as a shadow. He took up a simple harp one of them had made, and he began to play. The music that flowed from his fingers was unlike anything the ears of men had ever heard. It was the sound of the light of Valinor, the memory of the two trees, the sorrow of the sea, and the wisdom of ages uncounted. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. One by one, the men awoke, but they did not cry out in alarm. They lay in perfect stillness, ensnared by the melody. The music bypassed their minds and spoke directly to their hearts, answering the questions they had not known how to ask, soothing the fears that had driven them for centuries. It was a song of a home they had never known, a peace they had never felt. Balan, their chieftain, was the first to understand. He rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the fair-faced, beardless stranger whose hair shone like gold in the firelight. When the music ended, silence fell, a silence deeper than before. Bëor looked upon Finrod, and in the Elf King's eyes he saw not a threat, not a monster of the woods, but a wisdom and a light that his soul had been seeking since the day he was born. He saw a lord of a race far greater than his own, yet there was no malice in him, only a profound and ancient kindness. Fear was forgotten. Suspicion was burned away. Finrod sat with them and spoke. He had a power over hearts and minds, and as he conversed with Bëor, the Elf King's own language flowered in the man's mind, allowing them to speak freely. Bëor learned of the Eldar, of their long history, of the light of the West, and of the great enemy who now held the North in his iron grip. For a full year, Finrod remained with them, teaching them, guiding them. The men came to love him, and they called him Nome, which in their tongue meant wisdom. And Bëor, their chieftain, loved him most of all. In Finrod, he saw the fulfillment of their long journey. This was the light they had been seeking. But the world was not at peace. A year passed, and Finrod knew he must return to his own kingdom of Nargothrond. He prepared to bid farewell to the people he had come to cherish. It was at this moment that the fate of men was sealed. As Finrod made to depart, Bëor rose and declared that his son, Baran, would now lead their people. His own path was now a different one. He walked to Finrod's side, and in a voice clear and strong, pledged his life and service to the Elven King until the end of his days. This was an act without precedent. A mortal, choosing to forsake his own kin, his own lordship, to follow a being of another race into a world he did not understand, out of pure love and loyalty. It was the first bond of faith between man and elf. Finrod accepted his service, and from that day forward, the chieftain Balan was known only as Bëor, which in the Elven tongue meant vassal. They journeyed together to the great hidden citadel of Nargothrond. There, Bëor the Old, the first of men to enter an elven realm, lived out the remainder of his days. He served Finrod Felagund with unwavering loyalty, learning the deep lore of the Eldar, his mind growing rich with wisdom, even as his body began to fail. He saw wonders that no mortal had ever seen, the craft and beauty of a people who did not die. But Beor's choice was not merely personal. It was a signal. It was a promise. It drew a line in the history of Middle-earth. But what happens when such a promise is made in the shadow of the greatest war the world had ever known? For Finrod did not just gain a loyal friend. He gained an ally in a war that had raged for centuries. By bringing Bëor into his halls, he had unwittingly brought the entire race of men onto the stage of the great conflict. They had fled one shadow in the east, only to find a far greater and more terrible darkness in the west. Bëor had sworn an oath of friendship. But what would happen when that oath was tested not by song and fellowship, but by the fire of dragon's breath and the unending malice of the great enemy? The answer would come, but not in the way anyone expected. For there was a darker secret hidden within the story of men's arrival, a truth that even Finrod, in his great wisdom, did not yet perceive. A terrible, chilling possibility. Were the men who crossed the Blue Mountains truly explorers seeking a new dawn? Or were they refugees, fleeing a terror they couldn't name? The lore tells us they fled from a shadow. But what if that shadow had a name? What if the agents of Morgoth had already whispered in their ears, long before they ever saw the light of an elf's eyes? What if their journey west was not a choice, but a flight? Or worse, what if they were being herded like cattle, driven towards the elven kingdoms as a new, unknowing weapon in the enemy's arsenal? This is the unspoken question that hangs over this first meeting. The elves saw in men a fresh hope, a new ally, a people untainted by the long grief of their own past. They welcomed them with open hearts, but in doing so, they failed to ask the most important question. What exactly did you bring with you? Because while Bëor and his house were noble, they were but the first wave. Others followed, and not all who came west shared Beor's strength of heart. Morgoth is the master of corruption. His greatest weapon is not the orc or the balrog, but the seed of doubt, the whisper of greed, the promise of power planted in the hearts of his enemies. Did the elves, in their pride and their pity, see only what they wanted to see? Did they see a reflection of their own youth, forgetting that the world men were born into was already a world poisoned by the Dark Lord? The truth is, the elves had their own secrets. Finrod told Bëor of the great enemy. But did he tell him the whole story? Did he speak of Feanor And the Silmarils? Did he confess that the Noldor, his own people, were exiles under a curse, stained by the kinslaying of their own kind at Alqualande? Did he admit that their glorious war against Morgoth was fueled not just by justice, but by a terrible, unbreakable oath of vengeance that had doomed them all? Bëor, living in the heart of elven splendor, began to see the cracks in the flawless gem. He learned the high lore, but with it came the high sorrow. He saw that these godlike beings were not gods at all. They were prisoners of their own past, their own pride, and their own immortality. And this revealed to Bëor the most profound and terrifying difference between their races. For an elf, there is no escape. A grievous wound might be healed, but the memory of it remains forever. A sorrow never truly fades. It just becomes another layer in an ever-deepening sea of experience. They are bound to the circles of the world until the very end. But for man, there is an escape, a strange, unknown gift that the elves themselves secretly coveted and feared. The gift of death. In Nargothrond, Bëor aged. Day by day, year by year, he saw the light in his own eyes dim, while Finrod's shone as brightly as ever. He felt his bones ache while his elven friends leapt like young deer. The unending beauty that surrounded him became a constant, silent testament to his own decay. The Song of Forever was the most painful song a mortal could ever hear. His oath to Finrod, sworn in the firelight of awe and wonder, was now reforged in the cold reality of this tragic understanding. He no longer served a perfect, radiant king. He served a doomed, grieving soul, bound to a fate far more terrible than his own. His loyalty deepened from fealty into a profound, heartbreaking pity. He had pledged his one, short, fleeting life to a being who had to endure forever, and Bëor would keep that oath to its final, bitter end. He lived for 93 years, and when the weariness of age finally overcame him, he chose the time of his own passing. Finrod sat by his side, holding the hand of the first mortal he had ever called friend, and watched as the spirit of Bëor departed, not to the halls of Mandos where elves must wait, but to a place beyond the world, a fate unknown even to the wisest of the Eldar. The gift of men. For Finrod, it was a grief unlike any he had ever known, and a revelation. He had brought men into his world, but Bëor had shown him the true price of that friendship, and the immense, unbridgeable gulf that would forever lie between them. Bëor was gone. His body was laid to rest in a green mound, the first of its kind in all of Nargothrond, a small, lonely hill of mortality in a land of endless life. For the elves, it was a mystery. For Finrod, it was a wound that would never heal, a memory of a hand growing cold in his own. He had gained a people, but lost a friend, and in that loss, he finally understood. The gift of men was not just a release from the sorrows of the world. It was a final, absolute departure, a journey to a destiny that even the Valar could not see. It was a secret they kept from the elves, and from the Dark Lord himself. The bond Bëor forged, however, did not die with him. His people, now known as the House of Bëor, took up his oath. They became the first and most steadfast of the Edain, the elf friends. They learned the lore and the craft of the elves, and in return, they gave them their courage, their loyalty, and their short, brilliant lives, burning like bright candles in the long twilight of the Noldor. But this first friendship, this single point of light, only served to make the encroaching shadows seem deeper. For other men followed, drawn west by whispers and rumors, and Morgoth's foresight was long. His corruption had not ended with the orcs. It had found new, fertile ground. The coming of men was not the dawn the elves had hoped for. It was the beginning of the end. This was the moment the fate of Middle-earth was sealed. The destinies of elves and men, once separate streams, now flowed into a single, turbulent river, rushing towards a sea of war and sorrow. The hope they found in each other was real, but so was the doom they would now share. Finrod Felagund, the friend of men, would carry the memory of Bëor into the darkest of places, a testament to a love that transcended the circles of the world. The story of this first meeting is not one of simple alliance. It is a tragedy of understanding, a tale of two peoples gazing at each other across an impassable gulf, bound by love and divided by the very nature of their souls. Their shared history is written in blood and starlight, in oaths kept and kingdoms broken. The saga of the Edain and the Eldar has only just begun. To witness every battle, to learn every secret, and to follow the chronicle of this age to its bitter and glorious end, join us. Subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles and become a part of the legend.